High altitude balloons are incredible. Hobbyists use them to capture stunning images from the stratosphere that highlight the curvature of the Earth and the darkness of space. While space agencies and space companies use stratospheric balloons to test and validate new technologies developed for long-duration space missions, and to perform experiments in a near-space environment for just the fraction of the cost of a satellite. These high-altitude balloons can stay afloat in the Earth's atmosphere for months at a time and circumnavigate the globe many times. They're also starting to be used to send actual people to the stratosphere for space tourism. So how do these balloons work, and how can you launch one yourself with your GoPro camera or your cell phone? Hi, I'm Roman Kozak, and in today's episode, we'll be discussing high-altitude balloons. I'm going to share my experiences working at the University of Michigan on advanced balloon technology, and I'll be speaking to my friend and balloon expert, John Guthery, who traveled to Alaska to capture the beauty of the Northern Lights from 100,000 feet.
I'm John Guthery. I've launched hundreds of high altitude weather balloons as both a hobby and for pay at various occasions. Worked with Roman at University of Michigan on some projects there.
This episode is sponsored by Altium. They're the world's most widely used printed circuit board design solution. Click the link in the description to download Altium Designer now completely for free. And the first 5 people that send me their Altium files can have their circuit board manufactured for free. When I was in high school, I opened up my Popular Mechanics magazine and saw an article titled How to Launch Your Camera into Space. It showed how anyone with just a couple $100 could capture stunning images of the Earth from 100,000 feet. In that moment, I convinced my best friend, Ben Friesen, to pitch in for supplies.
Figure out what equipment you need, where to buy it. Online, kind of the normal online retailers will almost all have all the equipment you need. Just, need a balloon, some string, a parachute. Helps to make sure your system doesn't just crash and, cause a crater in the ground and destroy your equipment.
Affixed to the weather balloon is a payload, which is connected to the balloon on a wire. That payload, which is often a lunchbox, is filled with a camera and a GPS tracker, as well as hand warmers to protect the batteries from the icy temperatures of near space.
I've had a couple of launches where the GPS system fails. Maybe put a note on there, if found, please call this number. If somebody stumbles upon it, maybe you might actually get it back. And then a lot of duct tape to tie it up.
These balloons start at about 2 meters in diameter, but as they rise in altitude, the pressure of the atmosphere decreases, causing them to expand, often to the size of a small apartment, about 10 meters in diameter.
Yeah, so with the normal latex balloon, latex is really good at stretching and expanding until you hit its limit. And it's not strong enough to withstand the pressure difference between inside the balloon and the atmosphere at a certain point. So it pops.
So the payload falls back down to Earth on a parachute. This payload often lands many hundreds of miles from where the balloon was launched, and you have to go retrieve that using the onboard GPS. My excitement for high-altitude balloons landed me an internship at the University of Michigan's Institute of Aerospace Studies. It was here that I got to work on super cool advanced balloon technology, designed and developed to keep these balloons in the atmosphere for months at a time, as well as return the payload safely down to Earth to a predetermined landing site using a fixed-wing autonomous aircraft rather than a parachute. John, so at the University of Michigan, we were working on 2 main projects. So one of them was trying to keep these balloons in the atmosphere for as long as possible. What most of us understand is when you fill up this balloon with helium, it rises, it expands, and then when the latex can no longer support that expansion, it bursts. Mm-hmm. So how is a balloon able to kind of stay up there for so long?
So there's a couple things you can do. You can either envelop the whole thing with some sort of fabric or structure to help support it and make it stronger. Or what most people do is you create what's called a super pressure balloon by using different types of plastic film. So if you look at some of like the very large NASA or scientific balloon payloads, or the ones, actually one that's probably most well known would be the Felix Baumgartner balloon launch, where he went up for a period of time, and I believe he actually floated there for a little bit. He sat at equilibrium, and then he jumped down. So those type of super pressure balloons are made out of special types of plastic that can withstand the pressures whenever you reach that equilibrium point.
The pressure is no longer equalizing with the ambient pressure around the balloon. Instead, we're maintaining a positive pressure inside the balloon, and that balloon never bursts. How do we determine the altitude that it stops rising? And if the balloon stops rising at different altitudes, could that be used to kind of enter different jet streams, for example, to carry the balloon into different locations?
So whenever the balloon reaches a set altitude, that altitude is determined by how big the envelope is. So you think whenever it starts on the ground, the balloon might be this big, the bubble of helium inside of it, or hydrogen sometimes. As it goes up through the atmosphere, it'll start expanding and filling up and getting bigger and bigger. And eventually your envelope will hold that pressure, hold its shape, because it is, a set volume. So whenever it completely fills that volume, it can no longer equalize. And so it's set at that fixed volume, and it begins to pressurize. If it keeps going up, it's going to be at a higher pressure than the outside atmosphere. Past that point where it can no longer fill its volume, it still has lift because of the helium inside of it. But once you go a little bit past that, it now has a higher pressure than the air outside of it. And so it becomes more dense as it continues to go up relative to the outside atmosphere. And you have to go past that volume threshold and a little bit past to overcome the lift from the helium to get that density to equal. So the overall density of the payload and the balloon envelope has to match the density of the outside air that it's in. So it's kind of like a boat sitting in water. Depending on how much weight it has, it'll settle at different levels, because it has to displace that water to float in it.
So you're saying you can set the altitude through calculations where this balloon will stop rising, and that's primarily based on the volume of this envelope that you create, and that's going to determine where the balloon sits in the atmosphere. Sure. And what are some desired altitudes for these balloons to sit at?
Depending on what altitude you're at, as you can imagine, different altitudes will have different wind patterns. For example, if you wanted to, sit in the jet stream and have a balloon go really far, at a really high speed, you could actually ride the jet stream. But you want to set it at that, the correct altitude for it to be in there. So if you go too high, you'll get outside of it. And a lot of times I actually see, the higher you go, it might actually be pretty dead air, and it'll just sit there and float in one spot. And if you're too low, the winds might not be as favorable. So one thing that some people do that's really cool that Google Loon was working on is that they were able to vary their altitude by controlling a bladder inside of the balloon. So you replace some of that volume of helium with air, and so that changes the density. Replacing it with more air will cause it to come down. So you can maybe get into different wind layers to ride it. Actually, they kind of pitch it as like sailing on the wind with a balloon, which is pretty neat.
Google Loon, I know, was looking to set their balloons at a specific altitude so that they would circumnavigate the globe and beam down internet to people. So that's a really cool application of these high altitude balloons that has benefits that are far better than like a terrestrial network, since there's no line of sight issues when it's coming from a balloon.
Right. Well, yeah. So you now put your antenna at 100,000 feet or something like that. You have a much larger view of the ground that you
Yeah,
can then see with that antenna, as opposed to like right a satellite, which would be even higher, and so its field of view is very large. Um, but as we know, satellites are very expensive to launch into space. And
yeah,
once they're up there, they're very hard to work on or repair. So if you have a balloon
for sure.
system that you can launch very quickly to get a good amount of coverage, and the payloads are much cheaper because you don't have all your launch costs and the reliability concerns of a system that you can't recover. The economics become favorable in many scenarios.
The second thing that we were working on was an autonomous aircraft that would be connected to the flight wire of these balloons. And at a certain altitude and location, that wire could be automatically cut, and that payload could fly back down to a predetermined location using this unpowered glider as an example. And what's the advantage of doing something like that?
So if you want to recover your payload, and you don't need the balloon envelope back necessarily, if you can cut it down and you have a system to fly it to a known location, it's much easier to recover than say popping your balloon and letting it fall wherever it does in a known few mile radius area.
Yeah,
I've done many of those balloon recoveries, and they're all each one's a different adventure. Some of them are impossible to recover,
right.
say if it lands in the ocean. But yeah, if you have a controlled glider that can come down and land in a certain landing zone, then you can just walk out to the field, maybe in your backyard, and just pick it up.
A huge thanks to John for taking the time to share his experiences. And thank you for watching. Please leave a comment down below to let me know what you think. This video was only possible thanks to Altium's generous and enthusiastic support. If you're a beginner looking to design your first printed circuit board, a university engineering student, or a professional using a different CAD package, Altium makes it simple to learn as well as switch to. They're the leading PCB design solution as well as the industry standard, and widely used in academia as well. I know I had to use it in my engineering degree. Also, the first 5 people that send me their Altium design files can have it manufactured for free. Just check down below in the description to see how many of those 5 credits remain. And again, don't forget to click the link in the description to try out Altium completely for free. Let me know what you think.